Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Moran, and I'm the CEO of Sixth and I. To everyone here in person and everyone joining us virtually from home, I'm grateful that you're marking this day with us. Whatever motivated you to be here, whether you're looking for comfort, community, perspective, or maybe something else, I hope tonight's conversation meets you where you are. I'd like to thank The Forward, the nation's oldest independent news organization, for partnering with us tonight. The Forward has what I consider to be the best daily overview of what's happening in the Jewish world. Sign up for their newsletters covering news, culture, opinion, and more. We encourage you to sign up right at forward.com/newsletters. 1 year to go, in the immediate aftermath of learning about Hamas's terrorist attack on Israel, and what we'd soon understand to be the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust. Several of us on the staff at the Sixth and I team got on Zoom, some even breaking their personal Shabbat observance, to figure out what to do about our Simchat Torah celebration that was scheduled for later that night. It's typically one of our most exuberant nights of the year. But we knew we needed to reimagine it all. But we couldn't imagine then how much our lives would be changed in the year to come. As we mark 1 year since October 7th, we hold space for our profound pain, and we honor the 1,200 innocent people who were brutally murdered that day. We at Sixth and I have been grounded by the words of John Polin and Rachel Goldberg Polin, the parents of Hirsch Goldberg Polin, who was murdered after being held hostage for nearly a year, when they say there is a surplus of agony on all sides of the tragic conflict in the Middle East. In a competition of pain, there are no winners. I want to sincerely thank Lee Yaron for being with us tonight to share her new book, 10/7, 100 Human Stories. This is a deeply rooted work of investigative journalism. Lee profiles victims from every massacre site. Those you meet in her book range from left-wing kibbutzniks to radical right-wingers, from Bedouins and Israeli Arabs to Thai and Nepalese guest workers, from Holocaust survivors to babies. And she depicts the fullness of their lives, not just their final moments. Lee has been a journalist with Haaretz, Israel's oldest newspaper, for nearly a decade. Her investigative reporting has resulted in the founding of state-level commissions and the changing of substantial bodies of Israel policy and law. She will be in conversation tonight with Jodi Rudoren, the editor-in-chief of The Forward. Previously, Jodi spent more than 2 decades at the New York Times, including several years as their Jerusalem bureau chief. Under Jodi's leadership, journalists at The Forward have won a record number of awards for their reporting. Thank you again for being in community with us tonight, and please help me welcome Lee Yaron and Jodi Rudoren to Sixth and I.
Thanks so much, Heather. It's great to be back here at Sixth and I, and thank you all for coming out. I know there have been a lot of events today, and we really appreciate you spending time with us, and I'm just really excited to talk to Lee about this remarkable book, which she produced in a remarkably short time, and you may have already seen some excerpts in Newsweek or in Tablet, or seen her interviewed on Morning Joe or this morning on Good Morning America, and she's also on the Jewish Book Council circuit at 5 events down and 35 more to go. So we really appreciate you being here with us. Given that today is a kind of communal and collective yahrzeit, I thought we would start with Lee's going to read a little bit from her introduction, which is about Shiva.
Perfect. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here with all of you. It's a very difficult day for all of us, so it's good to share it with you. I'll read from the introduction called Mourning. The Jewish tradition of sitting Shiva, of observing a ritual mourning period following a death, is derived from the Hebrew word Sheva, meaning seven. In the book of Yov, Yov loses his wife, his 7 sons, his 3 daughters, following which his companions sit him down on the ground, down in the dust, and attempt to comfort him for 7 nights and 7 days. Millennia later, in the lands of the Bible, as among Jewish communities worldwide, the ritual still follows the ancient formula. The 7 days of mourning start with the day of burial, as the immediate family members are compelled to sit. During this time, any semblance of daily routine is forbidden. A mourner may neither work nor cook, clean the house nor bath. They must remain in the home of the deceased, sitting as close to the ground as possible, embodying the lowness of their sorrow. The door must be left open to any comforters who wish to come to visit. Their role is to help to carry out the family's everyday tasks. Throughout this period, the mourners must abstain from any pleasure. They must tear their clothes to determine the reap of their souls. They must also cover their mirrors so as not to be distracted by appearances as they turn their gaze inward. Greeting mourners with any word involving the root Shin Lamed Mem, the Semitic origin of the Hebrew shalom and of the Arabic salam, is forbidden. No peace should be sought during the mourning period. On the 7th and final day, those who came to offer condolences are asked to wake the mourners and help them rise. Grief, the most controlling of emotions, must have a formal end. 7 full days, the span to God to create the world and all living things, is barely enough for us, humans, to mourn one single life. Judaism, which has rules that govern every aspect of human experience, from birth to death, offers little guidance on how to hold the kind of Shiva required following a massacre such as the one that occurred on October 7th, 2023, Shiva B'October in Hebrew, or the war that came in its wake. If one has lost one's son, daughter, mother, and husband all in the same day, should they be mourned collectively, or is there a certain order? Should one sit 7 days of Shiva for each individual, or collectively for 1 week-long stretch? What does one do without a body to bury, or if the body is held in captivity? Should one start mourning without a burial, or wait for the corpse return? Or if the body is in fragments, should one bury a single limb or tooth? What is the role of the comforters if they themselves are in mourning? And how to mark the Shiva's end without a routine or even a home to return to, especially in the midst of war? Writing this book, interviewing hundreds of bereaved parents and children, along with survivors and first responders, I search for answers for questions like that, for a way to mourn and a way to rise, for a way to once again say shalom.
Thank you. That piece was really powerful for me. I remember so vividly those first weeks when my friends in Israel, like literally, you we're going from funeral to funeral, and so many shivas um, at the same time. And last week we published an essay by Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove that was about how the normal rituals of Jewish mourning, to move from Shiva to Shloshim through to Shana, didn't seem to be adequate for this experience because there's so much ongoing loss. Right. And I wonder how now that you've written this a long time ago, now that we're at this anniversary date, how you're thinking about those stages of Jewish mourning and grief and how the families in the book are moving through it or not.
In many ways, Israel is still living the day of October 8th. I think we've been frozen in time, especially these families, but in many ways, all the people in Israel and maybe a lot of our allies in the Jewish community here and in other places, it's, as long as the hostages are not home, as long as people are still waiting to know what happened to their loved ones, you can't finish the Shiva. You can't try to rise. You can't, I was, like what I just read, thinking about these people, you should have a home to return to. But all of these communities was destroyed. So many people are still living in hotels. So I think this is a 1-year Shiva, and it might take another year until we can finish it.
So on October 7th, a year ago, you were in New York, really at the beginning of a master's program at Columbia Journalism School, right? You're
at the climate school.
At the climate school, sorry, at the climate school. You're covering climate. And obviously, whether you're here or there, the events changed the trajectory of your year. And so the first thing you did as a journalist was write an article for New York Magazine about 11 families and what they experienced. And then out of that, somebody offered you to write this book. So I would love to hear the story of both the article and the book in terms of how you found your characters, how you decided who to interview when, and how you I mean, the number of victims, survivors, witnesses, heroes was so vast. How did you pick?
I mean, I've been working as a journalist for Haaretz for almost a decade now, and I've always been focused in human stories and the stories of the people on the margins of Israeli society. If it's asylum seekers, if it's the LGBTQ community, victims of domestic violence. So I was always interested in like these people that we don't hear about their lives on the headlines usually. And when I wrote their stories, time and again I've seen how these politicians that are making them live these miserable lives are also retelling and mistelling their stories. And I came to understand that when I want to represent a political reality, I should always do it from the bottom up and go that the real story lies with the real people. So when October 7th happened, I mean, it was from the very beginning that we started being, flooded with all of this information and disinformation and misinformation about Israel and Palestine that came to us very much from the top down, from the same extremist politicians, from the official Israeli government, from the terror organization of Hamas, from the same people who led both Israelis and Palestinians into this crisis. So I knew I wanted to speak with the people and try to understand again how we got here, what happened, what will be the future from them. I felt like I can't hear these generals and politicians anymore. And then when I started interviewing, I had 3 principles. The first was to show the diversity. As you guys know, but not all the American readers know, Israel is a very diverse country. I'm telling in this book stories of refugees from Ukraine who fled Putin's aggression and came to Israel as a place of refuge, only to flee again, this time Hamas rockets, or stories of immigrants from the former Soviet Union and of Arab Israelis that are 22% of the Israeli population and also fell victim to Hamas and, and Holocaust survivors, so many different communities. So I knew I wanted to represent all of them. I knew I wanted to represent the underprivileged because people forget that some of these communities were among Israel's poorest. I mean, these towns near the border, not the kibbutzim, towns like Ofakim. We can speak about it later. My family is from Ofakim, so I know this place very well. They don't even have money to have shelters in their homes. So I wanted people to know that the people that were massacred are people that were just struggling to make a living, not thinking about politics, not thinking about... And the third principle that I understood while writing it and while doing the interviews was that it wouldn't be right to tell individual stories. Because this is not a tragedy of individuals. It's not one family that is mourning one son or daughter, as horrible as just this thing is, but it's full communities that were destroyed. It's people that are mourning their family and their friends and their neighbors and their homes and everything they believed in. So what I did was to choose a few stories that I thought were interesting in every community. And then I reached the family, and I asked them if they want to speak with me. For some of them, it was too painful. The ones that wanted to speak felt like it was something they could do for their loved ones to make them remembered. And when I was speaking with them and getting to know their loved ones, I was asking about their relationship the victim had with other victims or survivors. And this kind of web of connections, of relationship, became the backbone of the book. For example, there's a story of this brave young woman in a kibbutz that was in the Kitat Konenut, in the emergency squad, and was able to save so many people, but all of these days she's checking her phone and worrying because her best friend was in the Nova party. And she could rescue everyone, but she couldn't do anything for him. And he died there. So sometimes the connections are inside the chapter about a certain community, and sometimes they cross different communities.
I love what you said about the ground up kind of journalism. I always talk about this as I tell reporters all the time to make the small big or make the big story small, because I think it's more easy to relate to it when you can bring it to a individual level or a family level. And the other thing that I thought was that really surprised me about the book in a way, and that I thought was so effective was, I feel like by now a lot of us have heard a lot of stories about certain of the hostages or certain of the victims or certain of the heroes, and you really did uncover a lot of news stories that I think, I don't know if they've never been covered, but I think are much less familiar. And I was struck particularly by I think the first two chapters. The first chapter is about this story in Sderot, where these two little girls, Leah and Romy Suissa, are... what happens to them. You can talk about it a little bit, and how they end up with there's a whole network, as you said. And then the next chapter is about this, something I'd never heard of at all, but is a group of elderly, mostly elderly, kind of marginal people, lonely, not wealthy people, on their way for a spa day at the Dead Sea on like a cheap tourist bus kind of thing, internal tourism, and they also get caught up in Sderot. So how did you decide what to start with, what to put in the front of the book, and also find which were your stories, which were going to be the stories you were going to tell?
Right. I mean, I wanted to give voice to, even like inside the victims community, there are the families that have, the strength to go to media or have the connections. There are some people that, lost everything, but nobody reached them. So I tried to go to the stories that I couldn't find any details about, and just to figure out what happened there. One of these stories was the story of this bus. It's immigrants from different countries from the former Soviet Union that had this joke that in their bus, the Soviet Union is reunited again while they're driving. And they came from these poor towns, so they couldn't afford themselves like nice vacations, but they were retired and they wanted to, explore Israel a bit and rest. So they were part of a group that is called Alexei Tours. Alexei offers, if you pay him $25, he'll give you a bus drive to the Dead Sea, no meals, no guide, but you can spend there like 8 hours and go back. And that was like the best deal for these people. And it was so like people were fighting each other who will get to this bus. He had like 19 spots for 10-7. This was like a trip they took every few weeks, and these people would go again and again, and they knew each other, they became friends. And there was this whole fight about who's gonna be in the bus of 10-7. And in that morning, the bus picks the people up from the different towns, and they only drive like 30 minutes until they have a tire, and they stop. And
They have a flat tire.
yeah, they have a flat tire, and the driver tries to fix it, and he says he can't, and they're waiting, and they're standing right near a shelter, but of course it's like a technological shelter, so it doesn't work, and it doesn't open up.
You're supposed to have like some kind of high-tech door that doesn't work?
It's supposed to be opened immediately if there's a
If
rocket.
there's a siren. Okay,
Yeah.
automatically.
And the siren started, and it wouldn't open. And they called them, like the municipality of Sderot, again and again. No one was answering. And while they were waiting, a van full of Hamas terrorists came and just killed each and every one of these people. And their children are feeling, they don't have answers, and they feel like nobody cares about their parents, and nobody is telling their stories. So yeah, it means a lot to them and a lot to me to be able to remember them. So that was one of the reasons that this is the second chapter.
How did you hear about their story, since it was kind of below the radar?
One or two of them were published in Israeli media, and I kind of like...
So you would find like a little reference and then go and...
And again, from one another. I mean, when I spoke with, like, I found one daughter of a victim, so I told her, who were your father's friend in these trips? Like, give me their number. And then, so just one story led to another. And in the first chapter of Sderot, it's a remarkable story because it's a story of Jewish families and Arab families that are strangers. They never met. But all of them, they are three families. The Azugi family, that they're finding the girls. They're finding two little girls covered in blood near a police station. Someone is giving them the girls and telling them, run and take them somewhere safe. There is the Abu Sabila family, which is a family of Israeli Bedouins from an unrecognized village. The father was just working in the area, and he saw that the Suisa mother was really, really scared after the Hamas terrorists already shot at their area, and just left his car, left everything, entered her car and tried to drive her to save her. And I mean, I will not get to the full story, but it's just remarkable to see the way we can live together and support each other, the way that in Israel these things are not only a dream, they're happening. These were Arab and Jews sacrificing each other to try, to save people in this horrible day. And it's a very sad story, but it's also a story that gives me some kind of hope for our future.
In each case, there are two things. You talked about the intertwining, and this is a good example of different stories from different parts of Israel and how people are interconnected, which is, and we of course have similar things happening like on the kibbutzim, which we know much more about how those people's lives are interconnected. In most of the chapters, you also did not just tell the story of 10/7, but you went back in some cases many generations to tell the story of that family and how they came to be in Israel and how they came to be on this kibbutz or how this kibbutz came to be. Is that a particularly Israeli thing, why you did that? Or say more about why is that important to make the story not about this day, but really about the backstories as well?
I think it's the opposite. As Israelis, we have this tendency to think that history started in 48. But no, one of the first things I realized writing this book was that 10/7 is not part of only Israeli history. It's part of Jewish history. And, when the news were quickly unfolding, I understood I'll be doing the deeper work of connecting this day and these victims to the wider context. Because it's like, I know it from my family. Our last name is Adato, from my mother's side.
It's what again?
Adato. It's 4 letters in Hebrew that are in Hebrew Gematria 1496, which is the year that my family was deported from Portugal with the rest of the Portuguese Jews. And for 500 years, when we were, wandering between Italy and Turkey and then Israel, we kept this surname as a reminder to the injustice. And my father's family, we were Holocaust survivors from Romania and Russia, people that went through many pogroms. And I remember my grandparents from both sides struggling in Israel, struggling with the language, struggling with the culture, struggling not finding jobs because they came in an older age, living in poverty. But they had this dream of Israel as a safe place for their children and grandchildren. And they told us all of the sacrifice we're doing, worth it, if you will not go through what we've been through, if you live with a sense of safety. And I think when this fence was broken on 10/7, it wasn't just the physical barrier. It was this dream of generations of Israel as a place of refuge that was shattered too. And I heard it from almost all the families that I interviewed for this book. And it doesn't matter if they came from Arab countries or countries from the former Soviet Union or from Europe. And maybe we can give the example of Shachar Tzemach. Shachar was this peace activist from Kibbutz Be'eri. He was giving testimonies to the organization Breaking the Silence, giving Torah in Hebron, in the occupied territories, working hard for a two-state solution. But when the terrorists entered Kibbutz Be'eri, Shachar took a weapon and went to defend the clinic where some doctors and paramedics were trying to take care of the injured. And he stood there until he had no bullets. He called the IDF again and again and said, "We need help. There are hundreds of terrorists here." And nobody came. And when the terrorists eventually came instead of the IDF, he put his hands up and he said, "I'm not your enemy. Please don't shoot me." And obviously they did. And when I'm speaking with his family, they tell me about his grandmother, about Carmela Tzemach. There was just a little girl in Iraq, in Baghdad, in 1941, when she escaped and survived the Farhud pogrom, when her Arab neighbors murdered their Jewish neighbors. And that was her reason to come to Israel and to start this kibbutzim. And they're asking what Carmela would say if she knew how Shahar ended his life. And so it's a wound that was reopened.
Yep. Okay, I'm going to lighten it up by asking you something about you and get us off of the trauma for a moment. I love how you say you've been a journalist for nearly a decade, like that's a long time. Shows how, because you're really young. But I'm wondering how you got into this racket in the first place. Why journalism, and why did you start, and why are you staying with journalism?
Oh, wow. I wanted to be an actor, and I was not successful. And I started in the army. In Israel, we have, a mandatory service. And I needed to fill up if I want to be a cook or I want to be a journalist. So
In the army?
In the army. So I said, fine. I ended up being the editor of Bamachaneh, that was like the culture news magazine of the IDF, and was already closed when I was 19. And after that, I think I fell in love in your ability to influence when you write and touch people and change. And I mean, most of what I did during my years working for Haaretz was to try and change policies of discrimination, because I was working with this, very unprivileged communities. And in Israel, because we're a small country, it's kind of possible to influence. I mean, not easily, but I would go to a topic. For example, the city of Tel Aviv segregating black and white children in schools. So I uncovered that story, and then I would report it again and again and again until the mayor couldn't hear from me anymore, and they would change the policy. So this kind of things made me feel like journalism was a great way to make the world better.
I agree. And I'll ask you a little journalistic kind of process question about the book. The book is, it's told in a narrative style without attribution. It doesn't say who told you what. It tells it as though it's like an omniscient kind of blind narrator reconstructing these scenes that, of course, you didn't witness. And in many cases, the people who told you didn't necessarily witness either. You're writing a lot about people who are no longer alive. So I wonder how you pulled it together in that way. And you have, it's not kind of belabored by some of this person said this and this person said that. And for example, there's a recounting of a rape outside the Nova Festival that is, told as a very definitive account, even though we've seen in other media, caveats or what is the video evidence or what. So I wonder how you got so much that gave you confidence to write with no attribution, and what your idea was there, what your reasoning was.
I mean, it's different in each chapter. I usually had a few, people that gave me the same exact version of the events. And usually there were also messages, pictures. I mean, I tried not to be too graphic in the book because I wanted it to be a book about life and not about death. I mean, of course, I'm telling the stories of 10/7, but they're in every chapter, but I wanted to focus as much as I could on their lives, on, who were these people, what were their beliefs, what their communities looked like. what they love to do. So I needed to see everything and see things that I regret I've seen. But I didn't want to include all of that. Just when, I knew I had my sources, that was enough for me. And also I wanted, I wanted your readers to read it as a book, to be it, like not to, I feel like when you're telling them all the time, like this person told me that, this person told me that, it kind of like pulls you out of that, and I wanted to bring them in.
Like every Israeli, you also lost people on 10/7 or since in the war. And one of those that was closest to you is Gal Eisenkot. Um, he was 25. He had been a medic working with Syrian refugees. You said that he had recently started a romance, and he was called up in the reserves and killed in the first couple of weeks of the war in a booby-trapped tunnel in Gaza, right? You dedicated the book to him, and you said that he was a close friend of both yourself and your brother. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how Gal and maybe any others you knew sort of shape this project. How do you think that this work is different because you're not functioning just as a journalist from the outside, but in a way also as a survivor of this experience?
Right. When I started writing, I had this, this thought that I'll be able to keep the boundaries I keep as a journalist between my personal life and my professional life. But I mean, from the morning of October 7th, even before Gal, it was kind of obvious that it wouldn't be possible because of my family living in Ofakim. They had, for people that didn't hear about Ofakim, it's this small town. The average salary is $2,000 a month. Even the mayor has this joke that he wouldn't admit as a kid that he's from Ofakim. He would say, like, I'm from Beersheba, because it's embarrassing. And on this day, 20 terrorists were shooting in the streets. And because people don't have shelters in their homes, they thought it was just another rocket attack, and they ran outside where the terrorists were waiting for them. And 49 people were murdered from Ofakim. And my family was saved because they stayed home. They were just too lazy to go out, and said, like, it was another rocket attack. It happened all the time. We'll stay inside. So from the very beginning, the fear was not like something you're covering. You're afraid for your own family. And when Gal died, I was in the middle of an interview with a mother who lost her son and daughter-in-law. And a friend called me because Gal's death was already all over the news.
His father was a minister in the government and a former IDF.
Gal's
chief,
father is Gadi Eisenkot.
So it was a very big news event when his...
Gal became in his death this political symbol, something that I think shaped a lot of what this book looks like, because I was so angry that not only that my friend was stolen from me, but that these politicians, took away his personality, his unique individuality with his death, and made him this, symbol of a warrior, symbol of death. Like, that's not my friend. He hated wars. He hated the army. He was a medic. He wanted, he didn't choose to have this military career like his father. He was a student, and he was busy in his, grades and starting his life. And he had this girlfriend he'd been with since they were kids, and they broke up, and then they just came back together in the war. When I came to New York a few months before the war, I left Gal my home, and everything. I left him all of my stuff so he can live in Tel Aviv. And so it was just this feeling of losing him, losing all of his dreams and unique personality. And I felt like what I want to do in this book is to do for these victims what people didn't do for us with Gal, to keep them alive on paper for what they were, and not as numbers and not as political symbols. And I want to say, writing this book, like, it was extremely painful because I was just interviewing hundreds of people that lost their loved ones for 6 months and writing these lives. And some days I couldn't carry this weight. But in the end, I think it gave me a lot of strength writing it, because I'm very privileged to be the voice of the people who were silenced. It's about telling the stories of the people that just can't tell their stories anymore. So it gave me a mission.
Your husband, who's also an author, wrote the afterword, right? And in it, he talks about the Jewish Sefer HaZichronot, the Yizkor book, where we list on Yom Kippur, when we say Yizkor, we have a list of everyone who has died, of our relatives. And he said that this book, in some ways, is a Sefer HaZichronot for people who were lost on 10/7. And you spoke earlier about how important it was to you to represent the diversity of the people who were affected and of Israel itself. And you do that really, really effectively. But I want to also just say that for me, in the last few months especially, and in some ways reading this book, and in some ways on this day, I feel, I don't know what I feel. I don't know if guilty is the right word, but I feel like I know a lot about the hostages and the victims of this day. I learned a lot more from this book about more of them. And yet there's also all of these other people on the other side of the fence who have been killed, about whom I know almost nothing. I don't know the names of the 40,000 Palestinians who've been killed in Gaza, or of the people who've been killed in the last few weeks in Lebanon. And I wonder how you kind of reconcile that, or how you think about that. This obviously isn't a book about that. It's a book about what happened on this day. But you spoke already about how much you care about all of the people. So I wonder how you grapple with that.
Of course, I mean, the tool this war had on innocent Gazans, mothers, children, men that had nothing to do with the crimes of Hamas is unimaginable. I mean, 41,000 people is, I mean, it's a lot more than we can contain. And I share the grief of my Palestinian friends and neighbors there. I was thinking a lot about whether I can tell their stories or not. And after conversations with Palestinian friends, and out of respect and recognition that it's not my people's story to tell, especially in this time, I decided to write about my own people while waiting for my Palestinian colleagues to write their books about their people. I recognize that they need to write their stories. But I do tell the stories of Palestinian Israelis in the book. And I do write about the horrible death toll of this war. I see this book as a first step towards a solution, because we live in a very polarized time. Israelis and Palestinians, we became blind to each other's grief, blind to each other's pain. And every victim from both sides, it's just, the walls between us are becoming higher and higher every year. And I feel like empathy, a human solution, must come before any political one. And writing human stories, literature, I believe is the best way to create this empathy. I'm working for this book to be translated to Arabic now. It's one of the things I really want to happen. And I know that some of my Palestinian colleagues are working on their books. I mean, we have to recognize, I come from the young generation of Israelis. Not a lot of people know that, but 50% of the Israelis are 30 years old or younger. And what that year means, 1994, is that we were born with the assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, or a bit before. It means that we were born with the murder of the Oslo Accords, of the peace accords, and we never lived in a time of peace, of a time of hope for peace.
Right.
I can't remember a time where I thought it was possible. And it's kind of, Netanyahu is now the prime minister for 17 years. And we've been told again and again that this conflict can be solved. Cannot be solved. That it can only be managed. That Israel will take a military approach, a technological approach, that will have the Iron Dome, and that will be enough to protect us. And I think so many of the young people fighting this war are from this generation. So I do hope, Rabin has this famous lines from Oslo that he said, "I come to you today as a soldier. I come from the country where parents bury their children, and I come to you covered with blood, but I say enough. Enough with the blood, enough with the tears." And he could say it as a general and as a person that went through that. And I don't know when it will happen, but I am hopeful that my generations going through this horrible war will say, we lost enough, no more. We want to go back and search for a diplomatic solution.
Thank you. That was going to be my next question. So I'm going to turn to some questions from the audience. So someone named Alexander sent us a question. He says that he feels that the Israeli-Palestinian question has been largely ignored, intentionally or involuntarily, by the bulk of Jewish Israelis. And I think he's talking about for the past decade or so, as we've seen the Palestinian issue fade from election campaigns, et cetera. In your opinion, to what extent do the October 7 events constitute a watershed moment in whichever direction for both the individuals and the communities most directly impacted?
It's a great question. I mean, we need to understand that in so many ways, Hamas murdered the peace community on 10/7. They murdered what remained of the peace community.
Literally the people in the south were the people who voted for the peace.
The people who were donating for families in Gaza, driving sick Palestinian children to hospitals. I checked their voting rates. 94% of the kibbutzim were voting for left and center parties that believed in a two-state solution. So if elections were up to them, Netanyahu would never even, be in the Knesset, not even the prime minister. So many of these families are saying now, we feel like not only we lost our loved ones, but we lost everything we believe in. And they feel like fools to live near the Gaza border, to believe in a two-state solution. These are voices that I hear a lot. And we see the numbers. I mean, a decade ago, 60% of the Israelis believed in a two-state solution. A month before the attack, it was 50% of the Israelis. And when we're looking at the numbers now, it's about 25 to 35% of the Israelis that still believe in peace. And it's almost the same numbers for the Palestinians. A decade ago, it was 58%, and now, a few days before the massacre, there was a poll that says about 28% still believe. So, from both sides, we lost hope.
Okay, so that's a perfect lead into this question from Eric and Helen, who I think are cousins, which is nice. What steps need to be taken now to change Israel's public opinion, and I guess Palestinians too, but you can start with Israel, about the possibility of peace? What could happen that could turn that around? Because as you said, your whole life, it has been basically a shrinking horizon from that moment in 1994 through to now. What could turn it around?
I want to speak about the gender aspect of that everyone is overlooking. I mean, when we think about this war, how many women there are in the Israeli cabinet of war?
0.
How many are there in the leading roles in the IDF? Barely none. How many are in the Hamas leadership?
None.
No.
And as Rachel Goldberg-Polin said, no mothers in the negotiating room for the ceasefire.
Exactly. In both sides of this conflict, there are no women. And when we're thinking about who were the people that tried to prevent and warn us from this war, it was only women. It was these young soldiers named spotters, that's pitaniot, that were doing this horrible, difficult job of looking at the border all day for hours and hours. And their job was to tell their commanders if they see any suspected activity of Hamas. And they did. They told their commanders months and weeks before the attack that something was happening, but they were dismissed. And they were told, thank you, girls, you're the eyes, you're not the brain. And 16 of them were murdered on that day. 7 were taken hostage. And then I'm thinking about the peace movement. On October 4th, there was a huge peace march of Palestinian and Israeli women walking together from the Dead Sea from Jerusalem to the Dead Sea. And they signed together what's the Mother's Call.
The Mother's Call?
Yeah, that's how they called it. It's a group of women wage peace from the Israeli side, an organization that was founded in 2014 after the last war in Gaza, and a Palestinian organization called Women of the Sun. And they were working together on this Mother's Call and saying, as mothers, we have more that unites us than separates us. We all want to protect our children. And we ask our leaders the very simple, ask of go back to the negotiation table. Try and find a diplomatic solution. You're not even trying. And 3 days later, on October 7th, the co-founder of Women Wage Peace, Vivian Silver, was murdered in her home alongside 3 other members of Women Wage Peace. So when we're thinking about the future, I think all the time, what would happen if we've listened to this Tatspitaniot that warned us, if we listened to the peace activists working 4 years before, asking us to go back to negotiation, and how absolutely critical it is that for any future, after Netanyahu, whatever will happen in Gaza, if it will be the Palestinian Authority or a community of international Arab forces, we have to have women in both sides of decision-making of this conflict. And I do believe in our power to make a change.
I feel like you somehow snuck the looks at my next questions because you keep on teeing me up in the perfect way. So, because you mentioned the spotters, which is one of, and there was also there was the written report by the woman. It's one of the ways in which the intelligence clearly failed to understand the threat of 10/7. So this question which is not signed, says, do you think there will be a commission to investigate how 10/7 happened, and will Netanyahu face accountability?
Netanyahu will not face. He will not take any responsibility. I mean, he had so many opportunities to do it so far.
Will he be forced to by like an investigation, do you think?
I think Israel is now in a critical juncture, and I don't know what will be the future. I think that if you see the polls now, the opposition has more people voting. If the elections would happen now, the opposition will win. But Netanyahu will do anything to prevent the elections. So I don't see any elections soon, and I don't know where Israel's democracy will be in the time that we'll need to go to elections. I mean, our police is already taken over by, you know, the minister Itamar Ben-Gvir that made it his own police and is giving, you know, weapons to anyone making Israel America in the worst way possible.
Do you buy the idea that Netanyahu is continuing the war in this way only to prevent himself from, you know, losing his coalition, from having to go to elections, that he's continuing the fighting in order to protect his political power?
I look at Netanyahu as a hostage, you know, is a hostage too of this coalition. And the problem with having a prime minister that is trying to escape court and jail is that we don't know. And the very fact that Israelis can't trust their prime minister, that we don't know if he's thinking about his own personal interests or about the interests of the hostages or the Israelis or the families of the victims, is problematic enough.
Someone named Victoria, who's in DC, as we are, asked how you feel that social media has affected your reporting as a journalist and also on the book.
I hate social media. I mean, it's the worst competition for journalists because we're trying to like check the facts and, you know, do this like in-depth work, and then someone posts something that ruins your story, and I think it's obviously problematic to us as a society. I think that a lot of the process that we're seeing right now of Israelis and Palestinians not being able to speak, or I mean, you know, this chance of river to the sea. I hear them in two places, in Columbia University and in the West Bank, you know, here by pro-Palestinian protesters and here by Israeli settlers. And it's like this, you know, two different worlds that are refusing to recognize each other. And it's like there are 7 million Jews and 4 million Palestinians and 2 million Israeli Palestinians, and no one is going nowhere. And even if we'll post all the posts in the world and, you know, say we want to erase the other people and that we want to change the past, we can't change the past and we can't erase the other people. I mean, I don't see any other solution but a two-state solution, and I think social media is very damaging to the peace community and to the people that are trying to have this complex dialogue and trying to find a way for the both people to just live in safety.
I hear that. It's also like a two-edged coin, though, right? Because you probably learned about some of these stories from social media, and then you probably used social media posts in part to get the backstories of people or verify some of it, right? So it's like we're using it and we're
Right. It's definitely
impressed by it.
a love-hate relationship. It gives you the leads, but I mean, the truly, you know, interesting details in the book came from repeated interviews for, I mean, to give an example, there's the story of Moshe Ridler. Moshe was the only Holocaust survivor that was murdered on 10/7.
And maybe the oldest, was
Is
he
the
96 or something?
94 is the oldest victim of the attack and the only Holocaust survivor that was murdered. And I was speaking with his family a lot and going through, documents. I started his story in a little town called Haaretz on the border between Romania and Ukraine, where he grew up and was deported by the Romanian allies of the Nazis from his home to the ghetto. And I had all the story. From there, he moved to Tel Aviv after he survived the Holocaust, became a cop. And it doesn't matter. I wrote all of his story, and then I was almost submitting this chapter. I get a call from his family, and they're telling me, we got a letter from a Holocaust survivor who knew Moshe in this little town in Herzl, and she's saying they were deported from their homes in the very same day of Simchat Torah. That October 7 was Simchat Torah, the very same day, 82 years before. Check it. And they even didn't believe it, So I went to the Iskor books of
The what? Oh, the Yizkor books.
the Sifra Zichronot, to the Iskor books of Herzl, and looked at all of the archives and found out it was true. So this kind of, it's a small detail, but it's, the symmetry of from the Nazis to Hamas and everything we've been through in the last century, and you can't find that on Instagram.
How much time did you spend with most of these families? How many hours were you interviewing them?
It's different between a family to a family. I mean, some of them became almost friends, and you don't know if you're a journalist or a social worker or a friend, and this ongoing conversation, sometimes after even the book was finished. But some of them were very short. I had a father that, I was interviewing a father that lost 5 members of his family. And he told me, look, I'm going to speak with you because I want them to be remembered and they deserve to be in this book and to people to know them. But I hate it. And I'm going to be as brief as I can. And I don't want you to waste my time. So he gave me 5 hours and he said, ask all your questions because I don't want to speak with you after. And
Yeah, very
you can
clear.
respect that.
Yeah. The book is obviously extremely heavy. I mean, you definitely did capture the life of these people, as you said, and their personality and things that they loved. Particularly in the last couple of chapters, though, it is this kind of overwhelming, not just death, but real barbarism that you're kind of swimming in. So how did you cope with that yourself? I mean, how did you?
I mean, I couldn't sleep for long months while writing it. And when I was sleeping, my husband was complaining that I was shouting when I was asleep and I was shouting scenes from the book because I was so into it. And I wanted to know every small detail. For example, there's the story of the Thai and Nepalese students, a group of the 17 people, young students that came to Israel 3 weeks before the attack to earn money for their families. And they didn't even knew how to distinguish Hebrew and Arabic. So they were in the shelter. And when they heard Arabic outside, they thought it was their boss. So some of them went out and were murdered because they were like, hi, for them, we all hear and look the same. And there were 3 survivors from this group of students that are really in a horrible situation until today because they're still hospitalized, but they're alone in Israel. Their families can't afford themselves to come and support them. And they are traumatized after seeing 14 of their friends murdered. They went to the kitchen and tried to defend themselves with rice sacks and all of this and they are so mad that nobody in the world cares about them. They are so mad that there were some articles in the international media, but in general, they feel like we have nothing to do with this conflict. We just came to work. We're from Nepal. We're from Thailand. Why nobody has any sympathy towards us? Why nobody's helping us? And they really wanted me and asked me to write everything because they're like, people should know. People should know that we were begging, that we told them, we're from Thailand, leave us alone, but they wouldn't. So this was one of the chapters that is a bit more graphic just because I felt that I need to honor what they wanted in a way. And in this chapter, I was also able to find the investigations with the terrorists. And that was something I was looking for and couldn't find always. So it's kind of like you can hear it in a way from both sides.
This is the interrogation. Once a terrorist was arrested, the IDF is interrogating them, or the intelligence service. Yeah.
Right. But yeah, it wasn't intentional that the last chapters will be more difficult. I just try to choose the place of the stories with with the diversity and other.
So I know you have 35 more events at synagogues and community centers around the country, but what's next for you after that? What do you think, what's your next book? What are you going to write about? What are you hoping to do next?
I was the first climate correspondent for Haaretz. I convinced our editor that climate change should be a real thing in Israel. We're a country where it's always hot, so it's not such a big thing. People don't really care about it. And I was really focused in trying to make Jews and Arabs in our region that is warming twice the global rate to find ways to work together against this shared enemy, because climate change will create much death and destruction to everyone in the Middle East. It doesn't care about boundaries. So this was very much interrupted, or I couldn't focus on climate change anymore when 10/7 happened. And honestly, I want to find a way to write about Jewish topics and Israeli topics and kind of where we're going to. There's so many things that are changing now. So many Israelis that are now leaving Israel back to the diaspora saying, taking their grandparents' passports and saying, we want to try that again. And so many people from North America that are now making Aliyah and saying, we don't feel safe here anymore. And we want to live in a country where everyone are Jews and understand us. So I think we're living in a very, very interesting time in the Jewish community, and I will want to continue to cover that. And hopefully, hopefully my generation will do what we need to do, and we can, worry about climate change and the problems of the future. But until then, we need to solve the problems that our grandparents left us.
Wow, I think I'm going to end it there. Thank you, Lee, and thank you all for your great questions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Lee is...
Thank you.
Lee has copies of her book that she's signing. Where is it, Jackie? You're going to tell us? It's a great book. I encourage you all to buy it and post about it on social media. This is one of the things it's good for. Buy it for your friends. And I think Jackie's going to say more about that.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Lee Yaron and Jodi Rudoren, and thank you all for joining us. If you would like to stay for the book signing, please stay seated for just a few minutes. Otherwise, if you're